Hi there. I'm Lelia Lewis, and welcome to another edition of New Day, New Beginnings. Now, today I'm going to be talking about how you can have a peaceful life. I mean, no matter what's going on, we're all going to have issues at one time or another, but there is a way that we can remedy that. So, today we're going to be talking about the remedy that's available, but how do we achieve it? So that's why I chose my lesson title for today to be Four Steps. Four Steps sounds easy to having a peaceful life. It's not always easy, but you know what? It's doable. And that's what we want, something that's doable. It doesn't have to be that easy, but we just have to make up our minds that we want to do it. And as we go through these different things that we're going to talk about, um, just think about the things that actually stress you out. Me too, because sometimes we go through changes for stuff that doesn't even make sense after you think about it. So, sometimes we find ourselves stressing over stuff that's really not important, but we make it important because we keep thinking about it. And the more we think about it, of course, the more stressed we become. So it's almost like we're stressing ourselves. Well, that doesn't make sense. But some of the examples, just some of the things are, well, you know how sometimes people might make a negative statement. It could be about you or about something you think or the way you feel about something, but it's a negative comment and it kind of stays on your mind. So you're like tormenting yourself trying to figure out, I wonder why they said that. But, they're not even thinking about it anymore, but you are. So you're stressing out over something evidently to them didn't even matter. And then there's that peer pressure, and that peer pressure could be coming from your siblings, adult pressure on their children to be this or do that, or how come you're not doing like this one, or how come you can't, they're doing comparisons. And that affects children. That affects anybody, for real, whether you're a child or an adult. Other people's opinions, and that parental pressure, from your friends, from your relatives. Well, if that was me, I would do this. And if that, but they're not you. They don't even know how you think. They're just kind of shoving their opinion on you, but it's not them saying, oh, if I were you, they don't know what they would do. And what about fear? We're always fearful of failure, of getting in trouble, or maybe saying the wrong thing at the wrong time, or and then guilty about what? Something that happened weeks ago, months ago. Some people are still stressing over stuff that happened years ago. That's where the family feuds thing comes from. Feuds that the older people had years ago, and they like almost handed down generation to generation. We can't deal with that family because they did this back. And I mean, half the time, people don't even remember what the stress was. It's so long ago and it's so old. And anger and things like that. Now, speaking of anger, I don't know how many of you saw it, but on the news, right today on the news. What about the fighting over the parking spaces because of the snow? I saw two already this week. I mean, these two guys were rumbling like they were in a rink or something. Well, they were. They were sliding all over the ground over a parking space. Then there was another one where I don't forgot now, but something about the shoveling of the snow and putting it where on somebody else's space or something. I don't know. But these people get so stressed out over, and then an hour or two later, well, the ones that were fighting over the on the ground, they were in the street. So Of course, they both, one had a gun, one had a knife. Who does that over a parking space? But they did. So one got shot and one got a little bit cut up. And so they both ended up in the hospital. And then the guy that shot the other guy, I think he got arrested or whatever. But anyhow, the point is, neither one of them got the parking space. So somebody got a parking space, and it wasn't them. And with the other one, the one guy, he was so mad, he went over to the other man's house and kind of like beat him, pistol whipped him. And what are they thinking? So he went to jail. The other guy was pistol whipped so bad he was in the hospital. So both of them lost the parking space. They don't they don't think, and this is true. I saw it on the news. I don't know how many of you guys saw it. But I'm saying all that to say people get too stressed out over stuff that's not that important. That really wasn't worth it. Who wants to get shot? Who wants to get stabbed? Who wants to get arrested? It doesn't make any sense. But these are things. So the point I'm making, and all this can, this could affect your sleep. It gives you poor health. I mean, so it could come from anything. And I'm sure many of you have other issues. I'm just using those as the ones that I know of that happen for real. And the whole point of today's lesson is what to do, period. I don't care what it is. How do we handle it, no matter what the situation is? So the solution that we're going to learn today is going to be the same. I don't care what the situation is, but I'm going to go way back. You know how I like to go back, and in the biblical times, sometimes I read this stuff and it really makes you think. So I'm going to go back and back in Jesus' day, because I mean, the life he led, I mean, he had plenty of stuff. He was stressed out for almost every day of his adult life. His entire adult life, he was stressed out, and so were many of the people that even liked him and followed him because of what was going on, because of what he was. So I'm going to go back to when he first started teaching. He was young. He was 30, 31, 30. I think he started at 30 when he really started to preaching and going around. But when he first started, nobody was really listening to him, but once he started, healing the sick and making the blind to see and the lame to walk and doing all these wonderful miracles, of course, that got their attention. So, that made them begin to listen. Now they're beginning to believe. Wow. And they started themselves like, wow, do you think he's really the son of David? Do you think he's really the son of God? Because who else could do such miracles? Who else could cure diseases and make people walk that have been lame all their life, and people that couldn't talk? Nobody, no human can do that. But so no matter what, the first thing Jesus always did, no matter what his situation was to pray. Now, I just want to look at, and even some of the people who trusted him and believed in him, and they had faith, and that's what it took. Because if you don't, Jesus' first thing would always, Lord, tell me what to do, guide me, trust. Then he had to trust that God would do it. So the four things that Jesus did all the time was to pray. That was his first thing. And he does that every morning, every night. And you always hear about Jesus praying. He's always talking to the Heavenly Father. And then after you pray, he would trust and know that God was going to take care of it. And the other thing was, he knew when to be quiet. We have a problem with that. We have a problem with that because we don't know when to be quiet. But at any rate, so where are we here? Okay, so now The first thing I wanted to bring to your attention, I'm going to go to Matthew chapter 12, um, verse 22, because this was when he was like 30, 31. Um, and the Pharisees, the high priests, and all those people, they really began to hate on Jesus. Now let's go to Matthew chapter 12 and verse 22, because it's under the heading of the Pharisees' slander. Because people were bringing their sick and injured people to Jesus to heal them, because they knew now what he could do. And he did. That's when they saw him make the blind to see and the lame to walk and remove the devil from somebody. And all the people were amazed. That's what made them say, do you think he's really the Son of God? Do you think he's really the Son of David? But the problem was, verse 24, when the Pharisees heard it, they got angry. And they said, oh, he's not, he can't cast out no devils unless he was sent by the prince of the devils, Beelzebub. Now, that one sentence shows that when the Pharisees actually saw him doing this, rather than to acknowledge him, they started hating on him and said he was sent by the devil. He couldn't be doing that. And they began to proclaim him as a fake and a fraud, a blasphemer. He lies. That's not true. And they began to plot among themselves how to kill him, because the people now worshiped him and were gravitating toward him. And the Pharisees and the high priests, they didn't like that. So Jesus' life began to be stressful. I can't even imagine that kind of stress. I can't imagine that. I don't even know what I would do under that kind of stress. But let's go. I want to go forward, because not only did they hate on him, he was betrayed by his own people. Now let's go to Matthew chapter 26, verse 14 and 15. And that's about Judas Iscariot. Judas Iscariot, he was one of Jesus' disciples, but it says he traveled with him, and then he went to one of the chief priests. And Judas went to the priest and said, well, because the priest wanted to know where Jesus was, but nobody was saying. But Judas went. Now he's going to make a deal. And he says, well, how much will you give me if I tell you where he is? If I deliver him, he said. They said 12 pieces of silver. And then that's when it all began. Went to the chief priest. I said 12. I meant to say they gave him 30. It's 12 disciples. They gave him 30 pieces of silver. So he sold Jesus out for 30 pieces, and he led them to the Garden of Gethsemane, where Jesus went to pray all the time. Betrayal by someone you trust, one of his own. But that, and that's not even, a big deal. Well, it is a big deal, betrayal, because now that was only one of his betrayers. Because Peter, don't forget, Peter betrayed him 3 times, because he told Peter, he said, before the cock crows, you will deceive me 3 times. And Peter remembered those words. He said, "You'll deceive me for 3 times when they ask you about me." And when he was walking through the town, people were saying, "Weren't you the one that was with Jesus?" And he was like, "No, I don't even know the man. I don't know the man." And after he denied that 3 times, you hear the cock crow, cock-a-doodle-doo. But he had already done exactly what Jesus said he would. He betrayed him 3 separate occasions. And you know what? Speaking, and this is why I say stress can be to other people as well, because once Peter realized and remembered his words, Peter went away and bitterly wept because he knew he was responsible for Jesus being captured, because he got 30 pieces, not Peter, I'm thinking of Iscariot, but he realized, now look what you've done, for just because what? So the point is, it can come from anywhere. Jesus' life was a stressful life, regardless of all the wonderful things he did. He was totally stressed out. And then there was Thomas. They called him Doubting Thomas because he had believed, but he didn't believe enough. I'll put it that way. Because once Jesus was crucified, and when they said he came back, he didn't believe it. What did he say? He wanted to see. He said, let me see your hands. He wanted to see the holes in Jesus' hands where the nails had pierced him to the cross. He didn't believe it, even though Jesus was standing right before him, until he had to see the nail holes in his hands. Now, just think about that. How stressed could you be that deceived by those who were supposed to be your followers? I can't imagine. And we think we're having a hard time now. But, Jesus never stopped his same procedure to trust, to pray, to trust, to know when to be quiet, and to always forgive. Those were the 4 things he did. Now, even though, that's what happened to him, but at the same time, let's talk about the people that did believe in him, the people that called on him to help them. Let's go back to Matthew chapter 15. And I'm just going to read 2 or 3 verses of this, because this is like about the Canaanite woman. And in verse 22, it says, the woman came to him and she said, "Have mercy on me, O Lord, the son of David." She says, "My daughter is grievously vexed with the devil." And to be vexed means to be distressed. She's grievously, seriously distressed because she's been taken over by the devil. And in verse 25, it says, she says, she just fell on her knees and worshiped Jesus and asked him, saying, "Lord, please help me. Lord, please help me." But the whole point of this was that Jesus saw the faith that she had in him. And she said, or he said to her, "O woman, great is thy faith. Be it unto thee even as thou wilt. In other words, he said, you have so much faith, I will, I will remove the devil from your daughter. And her daughter was made whole that very hour. That very hour. And that, because of her faith in him, after seeing all he could do, she trusted him completely. She trusted him completely. And let's go to one more, Matthew chapter 17, um, verse 14 through 18. And this was about a demonic boy that was healed. And a man had come to him, a certain man, kneeling down, saying, Lord, have mercy on my son, for he is lunatic and sore vexed. There's that word again. For oftentimes he falls into the fire, and oftentimes he falls into the water. And I brought him to your disciples, but they couldn't cure him. But Jesus answered and said, Oh, you faithless, perverse generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I suffer you? And then Jesus said, Bring him here to me. And Jesus rebuked the devil, and the devil departed out of him, and the child was cured from that very hour. Now, notice there, the man said, I asked your disciples, but they couldn't do it. Now, further on, it says, and when the disciples asked Jesus later, they said, well, why couldn't we cast out the devil? And he said, because of your unbelief. Now, they're his disciples, but they didn't have the true faith that they needed to perform what Jesus performed. He said, because of your unbelief. If you had had as much faith as a grain of mustard seed, you know how minuscule a grain of mustard seed is? Then you should have been able to do it, and nothing would have been impossible to you. So it's all about the solutions. The solutions never change. The solutions are the same. The whole 4 steps, that's all you have to do. Today, the solution is still the same regardless. All you have to do is talk to God, pray to God, speak to him, be thankful continually, not just when you're stressed out. Because when you're not stressed out, that's when you need to be being thankful that you aren't. So you're supposed to be praising God in good times because you're having good times, and in bad times because you know he will bring you out. So the prayer is something that never stops. Never stops. You do that continually every single day. Throughout the day. Sometimes I just stop and say, Lord, have mercy. I mean, because things are happening that are good. Thank you, Lord. Then once you pray and have a request, you've got to learn to now, first of all, accept his decision. Because a lot of times he'll answer your prayer, but it won't be the answer you want. But a lot of times we're not ready for what we think we're ready for. So that's when you've got to learn how to accept his decision. Because in the end, whatever he does is always for our good, even though we may not see it at that time, even though we may not understand it, doesn't make it not good. But at the same time, when you get in arguments, when you get in disputes, know when to be quiet. Sometimes it's better to just don't say anything. Just walk away. Now, I don't know what, those guys with the snow thing, I don't know what they were thinking. They just that was a spur of the moment. Oh, no, you're not. I did this. I cleaned this spot. Uh, and they both ended up in the hospital and nobody got this spot. But they don't think about that. Everybody thinks about right now, what I want right now. But what you want isn't always what you need. Neither one of them needed the parking spot. They just both wanted it, whether who shoveled or who didn't, but neither one of them got it because God knew that they were fighting for the wrong reason. Motive has a lot to do with your prayers being answered. What are you asking for that for? So, and then once you ask, you've got to learn to slow down, wait. You got to give God time. He's not going to just jump up and do it because you're asking today. He might not do it for weeks. But you ever have something come back to you and you say, oh, that's why I couldn't do that. I'm so glad I didn't get that. Oh, I'm so glad I didn't get that job because maybe it wasn't all it was cracked up to be. And then the last thing was knowing when to be quiet and then finally learning to forgive. Because even after Jesus took all that abuse, not only from the Pharisees, but from his own people, even as he was hanging from the cross, what were his final words? Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. How can you be hanging by your hands and your feet from the cross and still be willing to forgive those who put you there? So not only does it make your waking hours more peaceful, because once you get this steps in your mind and you start activating them and acting on them, you'll see your life becomes more peaceful. Your life becomes peaceful when you just start reading. Sometimes I'll be like, oh, Lord, have mercy. Let me calm down because stuff gets on your nerves. And once you let it get on your nerves, you know you're in the wrong area. So get back into read. Just start reading a few verses of anything in the Bible, anything about God. Look at a movie about it. They all on the movies. But that will make your waking hours, your day will go much smoother, much faster, and you will have peace. And guess what? It does help you sleep better. It does. It does. So let me ask you this. Would you be, first of all, you've got to be willing to do what he did. You got to be willing to pray first. Then you've got to be willing to believe that your prayers will be answered. But got to be quiet and wait for your response. And then forgive whomever or, whatever the situation was, let it go. Would you be willing to forgive? Is there something or somebody in your life you need to forgive? And my closing words for today are, never maximize your opposition, but never minimize your God. Until next week, I'm Lilia Lewis. Thanks for joining me.